Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you never questioned why you felt weaker every day? Why your energy was draining away drop by drop, meal by meal? The most dangerous predators aren't strangers lurking in shadows. They're the ones who kiss your forehead goodnight while slowly stealing your life away, one carefully measured dose at a time. But sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted when their prey is smarter than they ever imagined. My name is Marianne Whitfield, and for 65 years, I believed that a daughter's love was the one constant you could count on in this world. I was wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one who calls you mom, with a smile while calculating exactly how much poison your aging body can handle before it finally gives out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because this story, my story, is about more than just betrayal. It's about the terrifying realization that someone you've loved unconditionally has been systematically destroying you, not in a moment of rage or desperation, but with the methodical patience of someone who genuinely believes they're doing you a favor. I spent 42 years as a high school mathematics teacher in Burlington, Vermont. Numbers don't lie. That's what I always told my students. Patterns emerge when you know how to look for them. Equations balance when all variables are accounted for. And data tells stories that emotions often try to hide. These skills, honed over decades of dealing with teenage deception and academic dishonesty, would prove more valuable than I ever imagined when my own daughter decided I was living too long for her liking. My husband Robert passed away 8 years ago from complications related to diabetes. We'd been married 41 years, raised one daughter, and built a comfortable retirement nest egg through careful planning and modest living. After his death, I moved from our family home into a charming colonial house on Maple Street, close enough to town for convenience, but far enough away for the peace I craved in my golden years. My daughter Clara is 43 years old, lives in Portland with her husband Thomas and their teenage son Devin. Clara had always been distant, inheriting her father's practical nature but none of his warmth. Thomas works in insurance, pleasant enough but unremarkable. Their son Devin is a bright 17-year-old, more interested in video games than family visits. Clara visits twice a year, Christmas and my birthday, dutiful but distant, our relationship cordial, but never particularly warm. Or at least, that's how it had been until recently. After Robert died, something changed in Clara. She began visiting more frequently, sometimes staying entire weekends. She'd cook elaborate meals, organize my medications, help with household projects I was struggling to manage alone. Mom, she'd tease Yashtan, say, bustling around my kitchen with practiced efficiency, you need to let people take care of you sometimes. You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. She'd prepare my favorite chamomile tea before bed, make sure I was taking my blood pressure medication regularly, even bought me a new pill organizer to keep everything sorted by day and time. What a thoughtful daughter, everyone said. How lucky I was to have someone so attentive, so caring about my health and well-being. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, would often comment on how wonderful it was to see Clara's car in my driveway, how nice that my daughter had finally stepped up to help her aging mother. Clara works as a pharmaceutical sales representative, so she understood medications better than most people. She'd often comment on my prescriptions, suggesting I talk to my doctor about adjusting dosages, asking detailed questions about side effects I was experiencing. Her professional knowledge made me trust her guidance completely. But here's what nobody knew, what I didn't realize until it was almost too late. For the past 18 months, Clara had been slowly killing me. Not with dramatic confrontations or obvious violence, but with the methodical precision of someone who understood exactly how the human cardiovascular system responds to excessive blood pressure medication. She'd been crushing my prescribed pills and adding extra doses to my drinks, my morning orange juice, my afternoon iced tea, my evening chamomile tea. But she didn't stop there. She also began sprinkling the crushed medication into my food, mixing it into soups, casseroles, even my oatmeal. Always when I wasn't looking, always with that loving smile and gentle concern about my health. The symptoms crept up so gradually that I attributed them to normal aging. Dizziness when I stood up too quickly, fatigue that seemed disproportionate to my activity level, occasional confusion that I blamed on grief or loneliness, memory lapses that worried me but seemed consistent with what everyone expects at 65. My doctor, Dr. Martinez, was puzzled by my consistently low blood pressure readings during routine visits. "Are you taking your medication as prescribed, Marianne?" he'd ask, reviewing my charts with concern. "These numbers are lower than I'd expect for someone your age." I assured him I was following the prescription exactly, never missing a dose, just as Clara always reminded me to do. What I didn't know was that Clara was giving me double doses, sometimes triple doses, of medication, designed to lower blood pressure that was already well controlled. She was slowly destroying my cardiovascular system while positioning herself as the perfect, caring daughter who was so worried about her mother's declining health. The truly diabolical part wasn't just the poisoning, it was the psychological manipulation that came with it. Every time I felt weak or confused, Clara would be there with gentle suggestions about my failing health, subtle comments about how I was slowing down, and maybe couldn't live independently much longer. She'd mention assisted living facilities. She'd researched, talk about how much easier life would be if I didn't have to worry about maintaining a house, managing medications, making decisions about my daily care. "It's for your own good, Mom," she'd say, her voice filled with manufactured concern. "You don't want to become a burden on the family, do you? Wouldn't it be better to make these transitions while you can still choose?" For months, I began to believe her. Maybe I was declining faster than normal. Maybe I was becoming a liability. Maybe the kindest thing would be to simplify my life, sign over my affairs to someone younger and more capable, accept that my independence was becoming dangerous. But then came my 65th birthday, and everything changed. That's when I discovered that the most important lesson I'd ever learned in my mathematics classroom wasn't about equations or variables. It was about recognizing patterns, questioning assumptions, and never accepting conclusions without examining all the data. And the data, once I finally started paying attention, told a story that would have made even my most creative students gasp in horror. Looking back now, I realized that my 42 years in the classroom had prepared me for this moment in ways I never could have anticipated. Teaching high school mathematics isn't just about explaining quadratic equations or calculating derivatives. It's about reading people, recognizing patterns, and developing an almost supernatural ability to detect deception. You see, teenagers think they're clever. They believe they can outsmart adults with elaborate schemes and carefully constructed lies. Over 4 decades, I'd seen every variation: forged parent signatures, copied homework passed through intricate networks, cheating rings that operated like small criminal enterprises. I learned to watch for micro-expressions, to notice when stories didn't quite align, to trust my instincts when something felt mathematically impossible in human behavior. My students used to joke that I had eyes in the back of my head, that I could sense deception from across the room. The truth was simpler. I understood that dishonesty follows patterns, just like mathematical equations. Change one variable, a student's usual behavior, their typical performance, their normal interactions, and the whole equation shifts. Smart. People think they can manipulate all the variables perfectly, but they always miss something. There's always one calculation they get wrong. I graduated from the University of Vermont in 1978 with a degree in mathematics and a minor in psychology. The psychology courses weren't required for teaching certification, but I'd always been fascinated by human behavior by the logic that drives people to make certain choices. How do you predict what someone will do next? What makes a person cross lines they once thought uncrossable? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Robert used to tease me about my analytical nature. "Marianne," he'd say, watching me organize our monthly budget spreadsheets, "not everything in life needs to be calculated and categorized." But that precision, that need to understand cause and effect, had served us well. We'd paid off our mortgage early, saved for our daughter's college education, built a retirement fund that would have lasted us both comfortably into our 90s. After Robert's death, I threw myself into reorganizing my life with the same methodical approach I'd applied to everything else. I researched retirement communities, analyzed the housing market, calculated the optimal timing for downsizing. The colonial house on Maple Street wasn't chosen randomly. It was selected after months of careful consideration. Close to my doctor's office, walking distance to the library, excellent security system, reliable neighbors who weren't intrusive but would notice if something seemed wrong. I established routines that would have made my former students laugh. Morning coffee at exactly 6:30, followed by a 30-minute walk around the neighborhood. Grocery shopping every Tuesday and Friday. Library visits on Wednesdays. Doctor appointments scheduled for the same time slot every month. Medications taken at precise intervals with a digital timer that beeped reminders. My former colleagues often asked if I missed the chaos of teaching, the unpredictability of working with teenagers. The truth was, I craved structure more than ever. After Robert's death, routine became my anchor. Predictability felt safe. Known variables were comforting, which is why Clara's sudden attention should have raised immediate red flags. For 35 years of Clara's life, our relationship had been cordial but distant. She called on holidays and birthdays, sent appropriately thoughtful gifts, visited twice a year with mechanical precision. We exchanged pleasantries about weather and her work, discussed practical matters like insurance policies and home maintenance, avoided topics that might lead to deeper emotional territory. Clara had always been independent to the point of being aloof. Even as a child, she preferred solving problems herself rather than asking for help. She inherited Robert's logical mind, but lacked his warmth, his natural empathy. When she chose pharmaceutical sales as a career, it seemed perfect, a field that rewarded her analytical skills and her ability to maintain professional distance. But after Robert's funeral, something changed in Clara's behavior. The mathematical equation of our relationship shifted in ways that should have triggered my pattern recognition instincts immediately. Suddenly, she was calling twice a week instead of twice a year. She began driving the 3 hours from Portland to Burlington monthly, sometimes bringing Thomas and Devin, sometimes coming alone. She'd arrive with groceries, cleaning supplies, small household items she claimed I needed. She'd spend entire weekends organizing my medications, rearranging my kitchen cabinets, insisting on cooking elaborate meals. "Mom, you don't need to do everything yourself anymore," she'd say, taking over tasks I'd been managing perfectly well. "Let me help you. You raised me. Now it's my turn to take care of you." The words were right, the sentiment was appropriate, but something about the timing felt wrong. Why now? Why this sudden transformation from dutiful but distant daughter to attentive caregiver? People don't usually change fundamental personality traits overnight, especially not at 43 years old. But grief does strange things to families. I told myself Clara was processing her father's death by becoming more involved in my life. Maybe losing Robert had made her realize how fragile family connections could be. Maybe she was afraid of losing me too, and wanted to make up for years of emotional distance. I wanted to believe in this new version of my daughter. After 8 years of widowhood, the loneliness had become a constant companion. Having Clara's attention, her apparent concern for my well-being, filled a void I hadn't fully acknowledged. For the first time since Robert's death, Someone seemed genuinely interested in my daily life, my health, my happiness, so I ignored the inconsistencies. I dismissed the nagging feeling that Clara's questions about my medications were too detailed, too frequent. I overlooked how she seemed unusually interested in my financial arrangements, my will, my plans for long-term care. I explained away her insistence on preparing all my meals during her visits, her habit of organizing my pill containers, her suggestions about medication timing. After all, she was a pharmaceutical sales representative. Of course she'd be knowledgeable about medications. Of course she'd want to ensure I was following proper protocols. Of course she'd notice if I seemed confused or forgetful. But looking back with the clarity that only comes after the truth is revealed, I can see exactly when the poisoning began. The timeline aligns perfectly with Clara's sudden devotion, her newfound interest in my health and well-being. My daughter had decided I was living too long, and she'd developed a plan to fix that problem with the same methodical precision I'd once admired in her approach to everything else. The 18 months before my 65th birthday were, in many ways, the happiest I'd been since Robert's death. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a family again. Clara's regular visits had transformed my quiet house into something that resembled a home, filled with conversation, cooking aromas, and the comfortable bustle of someone who cared about my well-being. My daily routine had evolved to accommodate Clara's involvement in my life. She'd call every Tuesday and Friday evening, timing her calls perfectly to catch me after dinner but before my evening tea. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" she'd ask, her voice carrying a warmth I'd rarely heard during her childhood. "Did you remember to take your morning medications? How was your blood pressure when you checked it?" I'd installed a digital blood pressure monitor at Clara's suggestion, one of those fancy models that stored readings and could upload data to my doctor's office. Clara had researched the best brands, read reviews, even consulted with colleagues in pharmaceutical sales to ensure I had the most accurate device available. She'd taught me how to use it properly, how to record the readings in a small notebook she'd provided. "Documentation is important, Mom," she'd explained, showing me how to note the date, time, and any symptoms I might be experiencing. "Dr. Martinez needs to see patterns over time, not just isolated readings from office visits." The readings had, been consistently low, lower than they'd ever been, actually. Dr. Martinez seemed puzzled but pleased during my quarterly appointments. "Whatever you're doing, Marianne, keep it up," he'd say, reviewing my charts. "Your blood pressure control is excellent, better than patients half your age." I attributed the improvement to Clara's influence on my lifestyle. She'd encouraged me to eat more regularly, to stay hydrated, to maintain consistent sleep schedules. She'd brought me new recipes for heart-healthy meals, helped me organize my kitchen for better nutrition, even bought me a water bottle with hourly reminders to ensure I was drinking enough fluids throughout the day. My Maple Street house had never looked better. Clara would arrive every few weeks with cleaning supplies and boundless energy, tackling projects I'd been putting off for months. She'd reorganized my medicine cabinet, installed better lighting in the bathroom, updated my first aid kit with supplies I hadn't realized I needed. She'd even arranged for a handyman to fix the loose board on my front steps and adjust the door locks for easier operation. "Safety first, Mom," she'd say, walking through each room with a checklist she'd apparently researched online. "We need to make sure this house is set up properly for aging in place. You want to stay independent as long as possible, right?" The question always seemed rhetorical, but I'd nod enthusiastically. Of course I wanted to stay independent. Of course I wanted to remain in my own home. Clara's preparations felt like insurance against the uncertainties of aging, practical measures that would help me maintain my autonomy for years to come. My social life had improved too. Clara often joined me for my Wednesday library visits, chatting easily with the librarians who'd known me for years. She'd help me select books, carry the heavier volumes, suggest titles she thought I might enjoy. Mrs. Patterson, the head librarian, frequently commented on how wonderful it was to see Clara taking such good care of me. Your daughter is a treasure, Mrs. Patterson would say, watching Clara organize my library books by due date and subject matter. So thoughtful and organized. You're lucky to have someone who pays such close attention to your needs. Even my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, had noticed the positive changes. She'd often wave from her garden when Clara's car was in my driveway, sometimes walking over to chat when we were sitting on the front porch together. Clara was charming with the neighbors, asking about their families, remembering details from previous conversations, offering helpful suggestions about household issues or health concerns. "Clara's such a lovely girl," Mrs. Henderson told me one afternoon while Clara was inside preparing dinner, "and so knowledgeable about medical things. She gave me some excellent advice about my husband's arthritis medication. Said I should ask his doctor about adjusting the timing." I'd felt proud listening to these compliments, proud of the daughter I'd raised, proud of the relationship we'd finally developed. For years, I'd worried that Clara and I would remain forever distant, connected by obligation rather than genuine affection. But these months had proved me wrong. Clara genuinely cared about my well-being, genuinely wanted to ensure I was healthy and safe and comfortable. My financial situation remained stable and secure. I'd been careful with money my entire adult life, and retirement had barely impacted my spending patterns. The house was paid off, my pension covered monthly expenses comfortably, and I had substantial savings for emergencies or future care needs. Clara occasionally asked about my financial arrangements, but only in the context of helping me stay organized. "Do you have everything properly documented, Mom?" she'd ask while helping me sort through paperwork in my home office. "Will, power of attorney, medical directives? We should make sure everything is current and easily accessible if something happens." These conversations felt responsible rather than concerning. Clara was thinking ahead, helping me prepare for contingencies I preferred not to consider. She'd helped me update my emergency contact information, organize important documents in clearly labeled folders, even research estate planning attorneys for future consultations. The only shadow on these otherwise pleasant months was my gradually declining energy levels. I'd attributed the fatigue to normal aging, perhaps accelerated by grief and the adjustment to living alone. Some days I felt dizzy when standing too quickly, occasionally confused about appointments or conversations. My handwriting had become less steady, my concentration sometimes wavered during reading, but Clara was always there to help me manage these changes. She'd bring me herbal teas that she claimed would boost energy, suggest vitamin supplements that might improve cognitive function, encourage me to rest more and worry less about maintaining my previous activity levels. "Listen to your body, Mom," she'd say, helping me settle into my favorite armchair with a warm blanket and a cup of chamomile tea. "There's no shame in slowing down. You've earned the right to take things easier." I believed her completely. After all, what mother doesn't want to believe her daughter loves her? The first crack in my perfect relationship with Clara appeared about 6 weeks before my 65th birthday, though I didn't recognize it as a warning sign at the time. I was having lunch with my old friend Amelia Davidson, a retired nurse, who'd worked at Burlington Medical Center for 30 years. We met monthly at the little cafe downtown, catching up on neighborhood gossip and discussing books from our shared reading list. "Marianne," Amelia said, studying my face with the clinical attention she'd never quite shed after retirement. "You look tired. Are you feeling all right?" I'd been hearing this question more frequently lately, from various friends and acquaintances. I always gave the same response, just slowing down a bit, normal aging, nothing to worry about. But Amelia's nursing background made her observations carry more weight. "Your color seems off," she continued, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "And you're moving more slowly than usual. When's the last time you had a complete physical?" I told her about my quarterly appointments with Dr. Martinez, how pleased he was with my blood pressure control, how Clara had been helping me monitor everything so carefully. Amelia nodded approvingly at first, but then her expression shifted. "Slightly. Clara's monitoring your blood pressure? How often?" Daily, I said proudly. Sometimes twice a day if I'm feeling dizzy. She bought me an excellent monitor and taught me how to keep detailed records. Amelia frowned. Daily monitoring seems excessive for someone with well-controlled hypertension. What kind of readings are you getting? When I showed her my notebook, Clara had encouraged me to carry it everywhere. Amelia's frown deepened. She flipped through pages of consistently low readings, some bordering on hypotensive levels. Marianne, these numbers concern me. Have you shown this to Dr. Martinez? Of course. He says I'm doing beautifully. But look at this pattern, Amelia said, pointing to entries from the past month. You're having dizzy spells on the same days. Your pressure drops lowest. That's not normal aging. That's your body telling you something's wrong. I felt defensive hearing criticism of Clara's careful monitoring. Clara says the dizziness is normal for someone my age. She's very knowledgeable about medications. What exactly does Clara do in pharmaceuticals? Amelia asked. Sales. She works with doctors' offices, knows all about different medications and their effects. Amelia was quiet for a long moment. Sales representatives know about marketing medications, Marianne. They're not trained in clinical dosing or patient monitoring. There's a difference. I left lunch feeling unsettled, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Amelia had always been cautious, perhaps overly so. Her nursing background made her see problems where none existed. Clara's attention to my health was loving and appropriate. Wasn't it better to monitor too closely rather than not closely enough? But Amelia's comments planted a seed of doubt that began growing over the following weeks. I started paying closer attention to Clara's behavior during her visits, not suspiciously, just more analytically. I noticed that she always insisted on preparing my medications for the week ahead, organizing my pill container with careful precision. She'd count out each pill, double-checking the bottles against my prescription list, then seal the container and place it prominently on my kitchen counter. This way you won't forget or accidentally double dose, she'd explain. Medication errors are dangerous at your age. I also noticed that Clara seemed unusually interested in my daily fluid intake. She'd bring special herbal teas, enhanced waters, vitamin-enriched drinks. She'd encourage me to finish every glass, often bringing refills before I'd asked for them. Hydration is crucial for blood pressure regulation, she'd say, watching me. Drink with what I was beginning to recognize as uncomfortably intense attention. Dehydration can cause dangerous spikes. But my blood pressure wasn't spiking. It was consistently low, sometimes alarmingly so. Another pattern emerged during Clara's visits. She always wanted to cook for me, and she was very particular about preparing meals herself. She'd arrive with grocery bags full of ingredients, claiming she wanted to try new heart-healthy recipes. She'd spend hours in my kitchen, shooing me away whenever I offered to help. Relax, Mom. Let me take care of everything. You should be resting. I'd always appreciated her thoughtfulness, but now I wondered why she seemed so territorial about food preparation. Was it really about nutrition, or was there something else driving her need to control every meal I ate? The most unsettling pattern was Clara's questions about my estate planning. Initially, these conversations had seemed responsible and caring, but lately, her inquiries had become more frequent and specific. Have you updated your will recently, Mom? Is everything current? Who else has copies of your important documents? What about your financial accounts? Are they all easily accessible? Have you considered putting my name on your checking account? Just for emergencies? Each question seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they formed a picture that was beginning to make me uncomfortable. Why was Clara so concerned about accessing my financial information? Why did she need to know the details of my will? Why was she pushing for joint account access? The mathematics teacher in me recognized these as variables in an equation I didn't yet understand, but the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. My 65th birthday began like any other day, with the familiar ritual of morning coffee, and the gentle routine I'd maintained for years. but something felt different from the moment I woke up. The house seemed unusually quiet, and there was an anticipatory energy in the air that I couldn't quite explain. Clara had called the evening before to confirm the birthday dinner plans. "I'm making your favorite meal, Mom," she'd said, her voice carrying an excitement that seemed disproportionate to a simple family dinner. "Roasted chicken with herbs, those scalloped potatoes you love, and I'm bringing a special dessert. It's going to be perfect." Thomas and Devin would be joining us, along with my friend Amelia and her daughter, Dr. Sarah Davidson, who worked as a pediatrician at Burlington Medical Center. I'd invited Amelia weeks ago, thinking it would be nice to have a larger celebration, but now I was grateful for the additional company. Something about Clara's enthusiasm was making me nervous, though I couldn't articulate why. Clara arrived at 3 in the afternoon, unusually early for a dinner planned at 6. She came loaded, with grocery bags, flowers, and a large cooler that she carried directly to my kitchen. "I want everything to be absolutely perfect," she explained, beginning to unpack ingredients with military precision. "This is a milestone birthday, Mom. 65 years deserves a memorable celebration." I offered to help with preparations, but Clara waved me away with more firmness than usual. "Absolutely not. This is your day to relax. Go sit in the living room, read a book, maybe take a little nap. I'll handle everything." For the next 2 hours, Clara worked in my kitchen with intense focus. I could hear her moving around, opening and closing cabinets, running water, using appliances. Occasionally, she'd call out cheerful updates about her progress, but she didn't want me anywhere near the food preparation area. When Thomas and Devin arrived at 5:30, followed shortly by Amelia and Sarah, Clara emerged from the kitchen, looking flushed but triumphant. "Everything's ready," she announced. "Mom, you're going to love this meal. I put extra care into every single dish." The dining room looked beautiful. Clara had set the table with my good china, lit candles, arranged the flowers she'd brought in a crystal vase. The roasted chicken looked perfect, golden brown and fragrant with herbs. The scalloped potatoes were bubbling and creamy, exactly as I liked them. But something was bothering me about Clara's behavior. She seemed hyper-attentive to where everyone sat, insisting that I take my usual place at the head of the table while she served from the kitchen. More unusually, she was very specific about which plate went to which person. "This one's yours, Mom," she said, setting a perfectly arranged plate in front of me with special emphasis. "I made sure to give you the best pieces of chicken." Dr. Sarah Davidson was watching the scene with professional interest. As a pediatrician, she was trained to observe family dynamics, and I noticed her studying Clara's behavior with the same analytical attention I'd learned to recognize in medical professionals. Clara was hovering more than usual, refilling water, glasses before they were empty, asking repeatedly if everyone had enough food, if the seasoning was right, if anyone needed anything else. Her energy felt manic, almost desperate for approval. "The potatoes are delicious, Clara," Amelia commented. "What did you put in them? They taste different somehow." "Just some special herbs," Clara replied quickly. "I wanted to try something new for Mom's birthday." I took a bite of the scalloped potatoes and immediately noticed an odd aftertaste, slightly metallic, with a bitter undertone that didn't belong in the familiar dish. I glanced around the table and realized that while everyone else was eating normally, Clara wasn't touching her own food. She was pushing it around her plate, taking tiny bites, but mostly just watching the rest of us eat. "Clara, aren't you hungry?" I asked. "You've barely touched your dinner." "Oh, I was snacking while I cooked," she said with a laugh that sounded forced. "You know how it is when you're preparing food all day. But please, everyone else eat up. There's plenty more." The metallic taste was becoming stronger with each bite. I set down my fork and reached for my water glass, trying to wash away the unpleasant flavor. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Clara was watching me with an intensity that had nothing to do with normal maternal affection. Her eyes were fixed on my plate, tracking every bite I took, measuring my reaction to the food. When I paused eating, I saw a flash of panic cross her face before she quickly rearranged her expression into a mask of caring concern. "Mom, you're not eating much," she said, her voice carefully modulated. "Are you feeling all right? Maybe you should have some more water." But something about the way she said it, the forced casualness, the underlying urgency, triggered every instinct I'd developed over 40 years of detecting teenage deception. This wasn't a daughter concerned about her mother's appetite. This was someone monitoring the progress of something she'd set in motion. In that moment, everything clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The realization hit me like a mathematical proof suddenly becoming clear, all the variables falling into place to reveal an equation I'd been blind to for 18 months. But 42 years of teaching had taught me something crucial. Never act on suspicion until you've gathered sufficient evidence. Even when you know a student is cheating, you document everything before making accusations. I needed to test my theory. "Excuse me for just a moment," I said, standing carefully and noting how Clara's eyes immediately tracked my movement. "I need to use the restroom." In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and tried to think clearly. The metallic taste was unmistakable now that I was paying attention. I'd read about arsenic poisoning in mystery novels, but I'd never imagined I'd need to recognize the symptoms in real life. The bitter aftertaste, the way Clara was monitoring my consumption, her nervous energy, it all pointed to something far worse than medication errors. When I returned to the dining room, I implemented a strategy I'd used countless times to catch cheating students. I created a controlled test scenario. "Clara, this chicken is absolutely delicious," I said, sitting back down. "What did you season it with?" "Just the usual herbs, Mom. Rosemary, thyme, a little garlic." I picked up my fork and made a show of cutting another piece of chicken, but instead of eating it, I waited for a moment when Clara was distracted by pouring wine for Thomas. In that split second, I quickly switched my plate with Devon's, who was sitting to my right and had barely touched his food while texting on his phone. Clara turned back just as I was taking a bite from what was now Devon's original plate. The look of absolute horror that flashed across her face lasted only a fraction of a second, but it was unmistakable. For just that moment, her careful mask slipped completely and I saw pure panic. "Mom, wait!" she said sharply, then immediately tried to cover the outburst with a forced laugh. "I mean, that's Devon's plate. His food is probably cold by now. Let me get you a fresh serving." "It's fine," I said, continuing to eat from Devon's plate while watching Clara's reaction. "Still warm enough." Clara's composure was cracking visibly. She kept glancing between my plate and Devon's, clearly trying to figure out if the switch had actually happened or if she was imagining things. Her hands were shaking slightly as she reached for her wine glass. Dr. Sarah Davidson, who had been quietly observing the family dynamics, suddenly spoke up. "Mrs. Whitfield, are you feeling all right? You look a bit pale." It was the perfect opening. "Actually, I have been feeling strange lately. Dizzy spells, fatigue, some nausea. Clara's been monitoring my blood pressure, and it's been consistently low." Sarah's medical training kicked in immediately. "How low? And for how long?" I described the symptoms I'd been experiencing over the past 18 months, watching Clara's face grow increasingly ashen as I detailed each issue. Sarah asked detailed questions about my medications, my diet, my daily routines. "Those symptoms could indicate several conditions," Sarah said thoughtfully. "Have you had recent blood work done to check for underlying issues?" Clara interjected quickly. "Mom's doctor says everything is fine. Her blood pressure control is excellent." But Sarah wasn't satisfied. Blood pressure control is one thing, but those symptoms suggest we should look at other factors. "Mrs. Whitfield, when was your last comprehensive blood panel?" 6 months ago, I replied. Dr. Martinez said everything looked normal. I'd recommend updating that, Sarah said, especially given the symptom progression you're describing. Throughout this conversation, I noticed that Clara had stopped eating entirely and was fidgeting with her napkin. More tellingly, she kept glancing at Devon, who was obliviously continuing to eat from what had originally been my plate. That's when Clara made her critical mistake. "Devon, honey," she said suddenly, "maybe you should slow down on the potatoes. They're pretty rich, and you know how your stomach gets upset." Devon looked confused. "I feel fine, Mom. They taste great. I just think maybe you should—" Clara started, then caught herself as she realized how suspicious she sounded. But the damage was done. Dr. Sarah Davidson had caught the exchange, and I could see the wheels turning in her medical mind. She was starting to piece together the same pattern I'd recognized. Amelia, who had been quietly eating throughout the dinner, suddenly pushed her plate away. "You know what? I'm not feeling very well myself. Something about this food isn't sitting right." The table fell into an uncomfortable silence. Clara looked like she was about to panic completely. Thomas seemed confused by the tension. Devon continued, eating, blissfully unaware that he was consuming what had been intended as my final meal. I made eye contact with Dr. Sarah Davidson across the table and saw recognition dawning in her professional gaze. She understood exactly what was happening, and more importantly, she knew what needed to be done about it. "Clara," I said quietly, "I think we need to have a conversation." The conversation that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Clara initially tried to maintain her facade of innocent concern, but when directly confronted with the evidence, the plate switching, her panic, the symptoms I'd been experiencing, she finally broke down. "It's for your own good, Mom," she said, the words tumbling out between tears. "You don't understand what it's like watching you deteriorate, seeing you become confused and weak. I couldn't bear to watch you suffer through a long, painful decline." The key phrase hit me like a physical blow. "For my own good?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've been poisoning me for 18 months because you think it's for my own good?" Dr. Sarah Davidson had immediately taken charge of the medical situation, checking Devon's vital signs and calling poison control. Amelia was on the phone with 911, her nursing training kicking in as she provided precise details about the suspected arsenic ingestion. Thomas sat in stunned silence, staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. But while the immediate crisis was being managed, my mind was already racing ahead, calculating variables and planning my response with the same methodical precision I'd applied to complex mathematical proofs. Clara had underestimated me in every possible way. She'd assumed I would be a passive victim, that my declining health would make me vulnerable and compliant. She'd counted on my trust, my loneliness, my desire to believe in her sudden transformation into a caring daughter. Most critically, she'd failed to account for the analytical skills that had served me throughout my career. As the paramedics arrived and began treating Devon, who was showing early signs of arsenic poisoning but had caught it early enough for effective intervention, I was already formulating a comprehensive strategy. This wasn't just about exposing Clara's attempted murder. It was about ensuring she faced complete consequences for her actions. While Clara was being questioned by the police officers who had responded to the 911 call, I pulled Dr. Sarah Davidson aside. "I need your help," I said quietly. "Not just as a doctor, but as someone who understands the legal implications of what just happened." Sarah nodded grimly. "What do you need?" "Blood tests for everyone who ate tonight. Full toxicology panels. I want documentation of exactly what was in that food and how it affected each person differently." "Already on it," Sarah replied. "I've also contacted the lab to preserve samples of the food for analysis. The police will want that evidence. But I was thinking beyond the immediate criminal case. Sarah, I need to understand something. Could the symptoms I've been experiencing over the past 18 months be explained by gradual poisoning with my blood pressure medication?" Her expression darkened. Absolutely. Excessive doses of blood pressure medication can cause chronic hypotension, dizziness, fatigue, confusion, everything you've described. If someone was systematically overdosing you, it would explain your entire symptom progression. The pieces were falling into place with mathematical precision. Clara hadn't just attempted to murder me tonight. She'd been slowly destroying my health for over a year, using her pharmaceutical knowledge to make it appear like natural aging. The arsenic was simply the final escalation when the gradual approach wasn't working fast enough. Detective Morrison arrived within an hour, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who took detailed statements from everyone present. I provided her with my medication monitoring notebook, the blood pressure readings that had puzzled Dr. Martinez, and a timeline of Clara's behavioral changes over the past 18 months. Mrs. Whitfield, Detective Morrison said after reviewing, my documentation. This level of detailed record-keeping is going to be crucial for building a strong case. Most victims don't have this kind of evidence. I'm a mathematics teacher, I replied. Documentation and pattern recognition are what I do. While Clara was being processed at the police station, I was already implementing the next phase of my strategy. I called my attorney, Alexander Rousseau, a sharp criminal defense lawyer I'd known socially for years. Alexander, I need your help, but not in the way you might expect. I'm not the defendant in this case, I'm the victim. But I want to ensure the prosecution has every tool they need to secure a conviction. Alexander arrived at my house within 2 hours, despite the late hour. He reviewed the evidence, spoke with Detective Morrison, and helped me understand the legal process that lay ahead. Marianne, this is one of the most thoroughly documented attempted murder cases I've ever seen, he said. Between the medical evidence, the witness testimony from Dr. Davidson, and your meticulous record-keeping, the prosecution will have an exceptionally strong case. But I wasn't satisfied with just a strong case. I wanted Clara to understand exactly what she'd lost by underestimating me. Alexander, I also want to discuss civil remedies. Clara has cost me significant medical expenses, caused me physical and emotional suffering, and attempted to defraud me of my estate. I want her to face financial consequences in addition to criminal ones. As dawn broke over Burlington, I sat in my kitchen with Alexander, Dr. Sarah Davidson, and Detective Morrison, planning a response that would ensure Clara paid for every single day of the 18 months she'd spent slowly destroying my life. The student had become the teacher, and the lesson was going to be comprehensive. Within 72 hours of my birthday dinner, Clara's carefully constructed world began to collapse, with the same methodical precision she'd used to try to destroy mine. But unlike her covert approach, my response was going to be completely transparent and devastatingly thorough. The first domino fell when the toxicology reports came back. Dr. Sarah Davidson called me personally with the results, her voice grim with professional outrage. Marianne, the levels of arsenic in that food were lethal. If you hadn't switched those plates, if Devin hadn't received immediate medical intervention, we'd be looking at a very different outcome. The concentration was calculated to kill someone, your size within hours. But it was the second set of results that truly vindicated my suspicions. Blood tests revealed that I had been systematically poisoned with my own blood pressure medication for months. The levels in my system were nearly triple what they should have been for my prescribed dosage. Someone who understood pharmaceutical interactions did this, Sarah continued. They knew exactly how to use your legitimate prescription to create chronic, life-threatening hypotension while making it appear like a medication compliance issue. I immediately called Detective Morrison with this information. Within hours, she had secured search warrants for Clara's house, car, and workplace. What they found exceeded even my systematic expectations. Clara had kept detailed records of her poisoning campaign, stored in a locked file cabinet in her home office, spreadsheets tracking my medication doses, my symptoms, my behavioral changes, research printouts about arsenic toxicity, untraceable poisons, and inheritance laws. Most damning of all, insurance policy documents and financial projections calculating the value of my estate. She documented everything like it was a business plan, Detective Morrison told me during our meeting the following morning. Projected timelines, cost-benefit analyses, contingency plans. I've never seen anything this methodical. But Clara's systematic approach, which she'd probably thought made her clever, had actually created an irrefutable paper trail. Every piece of evidence pointed to months of premeditation, financial motivation, and calculated disregard for my life. The arrest made front-page news in Burlington. Local pharmaceutical sales rep charged with attempted murder of mother. The story detailed how Clara had used her professional knowledge to slowly poison me, culminating in an arsenic-laced birthday dinner that was thwarted only by quick thinking and medical intervention. Within 24 hours of the arrest, Clara's professional life began unraveling. Her pharmaceutical company immediately suspended her pending the outcome of criminal charges. Her medical license application, she'd been working toward becoming a certified pharmaceutical consultant, was permanently denied. Professional associations began investigating her conduct, and several doctors' offices that had worked with her started reviewing their recent patient outcomes. But I wasn't satisfied with just watching Clara's career implode. I wanted her to experience the same helplessness she'd planned for me. I contacted the district attorney's office and volunteered to provide detailed victim impact testimony. I wanted the court to understand not just the attempted murder, but the months of systematic abuse that had preceded it. Mrs. Whitfield, Assistant District Attorney Rachel Webb explained during our meeting, this case is unusual because of the extensive premeditation and the extended timeline of abuse. We're charging attempted first-degree murder, aggravated assault, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The fraud charges were particularly satisfying. Clara's own documentation revealed her detailed plans to inherit my estate, liquidate my assets, and use the money to pay off debts she'd accumulated. Through poor financial decisions. She'd already contacted real estate agents about selling my house, researched the market value of my investments, and even gotten preliminary estimates for auctioning my personal belongings. Thomas filed for divorce within a week of Clara's arrest, seeking full custody of Devon and demanding that Clara have no access to any marital assets pending the outcome of her criminal trial. His attorney made it clear that Thomas had been completely unaware of Clara's activities and was cooperating fully with prosecutors. She lied to everyone, Thomas told me during a painful conversation at my kitchen table. I thought I knew her. I thought she was finally becoming the daughter you deserved. I never imagined she was capable of something like this. Devon thankfully recovered completely from his accidental arsenic exposure, but the psychological impact of learning his mother had tried to murder his grandmother would require years of therapy. Thomas was arranging for counseling and had agreed to let me maintain a relationship with Devon, understanding that I was as much a victim in this situation as he was. The media attention intensified when reporters discovered Clara's detailed planning documents. Local news stations interviewed Dr. Sarah Davidson about the medical aspects of the case, and my neighbor Mrs. Henderson about the seemingly perfect daughter who had fooled an entire community. But the coverage that satisfied me most was the professional fallout. Pharmaceutical companies began reviewing their hiring practices. Medical conferences started discussing the case as an example of how professional knowledge could be weaponized. Clara's name became synonymous with a betrayal so profound that it changed industry standards. She had wanted to erase me quietly, privately, with no one understanding what had really happened. Instead, her actions were becoming a cautionary tale that would follow her for the rest of her life. 6 months after my birthday dinner, Clara's trial began, and I was finally able to see the full scope of justice in action. The prosecution had built a case so comprehensive that even Clara's expensive defense attorney, Arthur Manning, seemed resigned to damage control rather than pursuing an acquittal. The courtroom was packed with reporters, medical professionals, and members of our community who had been shocked by the revelation that the caring daughter they'd all admired was actually a calculating killer. I sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution table, making sure Clara could see me every single day. The evidence presentation took 3 full days. The prosecution methodically walked through Clara's 18-month poisoning campaign, using her own documentation to prove premeditation. They showed the jury her spreadsheets tracking my declining health, her research into lethal doses, her financial projections of my estate value. Dr. Sarah Davidson's testimony was particularly damaging. She explained in clinical detail how Clara had used her pharmaceutical knowledge to slowly destroy my cardiovascular system, making my death appear natural while maximizing her inheritance timeline. The defendant understood exactly how to weaponize blood pressure medication. Dr. Davidson told the jury she created a systematic poisoning regimen that would have been virtually undetectable without extensive toxicological analysis. But the prosecution's most devastating evidence was the arsenic-laced birthday dinner. They had preserved samples of the food, documented the exact chemical composition, and calculated that the dose would have killed me within hours. This was not a crime of passion, Assistant District Attorney Webb told the jury during closing arguments. This was a business plan with a human life as collateral damage. Clara's defense was pathetic. Attorney Manning tried to argue that Clara had been under extreme financial pressure, that she'd convinced herself she was preventing my suffering, that she'd never intended for anyone to be seriously harmed. But Clara's own documentation contradicted every claim. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts: attempted first-degree murder, aggravated assault, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and illegal distribution of controlled substances. The financial consequences were equally systematic. I had filed civil suits against Clara for medical expenses, pain and suffering, and attempted fraud. The court awarded me $2.3 million in damages, effectively seizing every asset Clara and Thomas had accumulated during their marriage. Clara's pharmaceutical career was permanently destroyed. Professional licensing boards in 3 states revoked her certifications. The company she'd worked for settled a separate lawsuit for failing to conduct proper background checks. Her name appeared on medical ethics databases that would prevent her from ever working in healthcare again. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was the social destruction. Clara's mugshot appeared in pharmaceutical trade publications as a cautionary tale. Medical conferences used her case as an example of professional ethics violations. She became a pariah in the community where she'd once been respected. The former neighbors who had praised her devotion to her aging mother now crossed the street to avoid eye contact. The doctor's offices where she'd been a trusted sales representative issued statements distancing themselves from her actions. Clara had planned to inherit my reputation along with my money. Instead, she'd inherited a legacy of betrayal that would follow her forever. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after the verdict, and during that time, even more devastating revelations emerged that would ensure Clara's punishment, extended far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. Detective Morrison contacted me with news that chilled me to the bone. "Marianne, we've been investigating Clara's activities more thoroughly, and we've discovered she may have done this before." The investigation had expanded to include Clara's previous elderly clients from her pharmaceutical sales territory. 3. Suspicious deaths over the past 5 years were being re-examined. Elderly patients who had died from apparent medication complications, while Clara was their primary pharmaceutical consultant. "We're exhuming bodies," Detective Morrison explained. "If we find evidence of systematic poisoning in these other cases, Clara could be facing multiple murder charges, not just attempted murder." I felt sick thinking about other families who might have lost loved ones to my daughter's calculated greed, but I also felt a grim satisfaction knowing that Clara's pattern of behavior was finally being exposed in its full scope. The media coverage intensified when news of the expanded investigation broke. Clara's case was no longer just a local story about family betrayal. It had become a national examination of how professional knowledge could be weaponized against vulnerable populations. During this period, I also discovered something that made Clara's betrayal even more personal. While going through financial records for the civil case, my attorney found evidence that Clara had been systematically stealing from me for years before the poisoning began. She had forged my signature on several financial documents, redirected my mail to monitor my accounts, and even taken out a credit card in my name. The pharmaceutical sales job had given her access to personal information about elderly clients, which she'd used to commit identity theft against multiple victims. Clara's been running a sophisticated elder fraud operation, my attorney explained. The attempted murder was just the final escalation when the financial crimes weren't generating enough money fast enough. The federal authorities were now involved, investigating Clara for mail fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse across state lines. What had started as an attempted murder case was becoming a RICO investigation into organized financial crimes against the elderly. At the sentencing hearing, I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. I stood before the judge and spoke not just about my own experience, but about the other elderly victims who might have suffered because of Clara's actions. Your Honor, I said, looking directly at Clara for the first time since the trial began, my daughter didn't just try to kill me for money. She built an entire criminal enterprise around exploiting elderly people who trusted her professional expertise. She perverted her pharmaceutical knowledge to prey on the most vulnerable members of our society. Clara sat motionless throughout my statement, but I could see the reality of her situation finally sinking in. The attempted murder charge had been just the beginning. The expanded investigation was revealing a pattern of crimes that would keep her in prison for decades. Judge Catherine Mills delivered a sentence that exceeded even the prosecution's recommendations. 25 years to life, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. After the sentencing, Clara requested one final meeting before being transferred to federal prison. Against the advice of my attorney and Dr. Sarah Davidson, I agreed to see her. I needed to understand how the daughter I had raised could have become someone capable of such calculated evil. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room at the county jail. Clara sat across from me in an orange jumpsuit, her hands shackled, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Mom, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I need you to understand that I never wanted to hurt you. I stared at her in disbelief. You poisoned me for 18 months, Clara. You calculated exactly how much arsenic would kill me. How is that not wanting to hurt me? You were declining anyway, she said, desperation creeping into her voice. Your health was deteriorating. Your memory was getting worse. I was just accelerating what was already happening. It would have saved you years of suffering. The audacity of her rationalization was breathtaking. My health was declining because you were poisoning me, Clara. The confusion, the dizziness, the weakness, that was all from the medication overdoses you were giving me. But you would have gotten sick eventually, she insisted. Everyone does at your age. I was just trying to make it easier, quicker, less painful. I realized then that Clara had convinced herself she was performing some twisted act of mercy. In her mind, she wasn't a murderer. She was a compassionate daughter preventing her mother's suffering while securing her family's financial future. And the money? I asked. Was that also for my own good? For the first time, Clara's facade cracked completely. I was drowning, Mom. The credit cards, the mortgage, Devon's college fund, everything was falling apart. Thomas didn't know how bad it was. I thought if the inheritance came sooner. So you decided I should die to solve your financial problems. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Clara said, tears streaming down her face. It was supposed to be peaceful, natural. You would have just gone to sleep and not woken up. No pain, no fear, and everyone would have remembered you as having a good death. I stood up slowly, looking down at this stranger who wore my daughter's face. Clara, do you want to know what the most tragic part of this whole situation is? She nodded eagerly, as if I might offer some form of forgiveness or understanding. If you had simply been patient, if you had been the daughter you pretended to be these past 18 months, you would have inherited everything anyway. My will left you and Devin everything I owned. You would have gotten the money, the house, the investments, all of it. The color drained from Clara's face as the full scope of her miscalculation became clear. But instead, I continued, you'll spend the next 15 to 25 years in prison. Devin will grow up knowing his mother tried to murder his grandmother, and every penny of my estate is now going to elder abuse prevention charities. I walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. Congratulations, Clara. Your impatience cost you everything you were trying to steal. 2 years have passed since that terrible birthday dinner, and I've had considerable time to reflect on the lessons learned from my daughter's betrayal. I still live in my house on Maple Street, but everything has changed. The trust I once took for granted has been replaced with a hard-earned wisdom about human nature and the dangerous intersection of love and greed. People often ask me if I regret exposing Clara, if perhaps family loyalty should have compelled me to handle things more quietly. But that question misunderstands the fundamental nature of what happened. Clara stopped being my daughter the moment she decided my life was worth less than her financial convenience. Family loyalty cannot exist in a relationship where one person is systematically destroying the other. I've learned that there's a profound difference between mercy and enabling. Mercy would have been forgiving Clara for a moment of weakness, a single poor decision made in desperation. What Clara did was construct an elaborate 18-month plan to murder me, while manipulating my emotions to make me complicit in my own destruction. That level of calculated betrayal doesn't deserve mercy. It demands consequences. The mathematics of justice is quite simple, really. Actions have predictable outcomes, just like equations have solutions. Clara chose her variables: greed over patience, manipulation over honesty, murder over waiting. The solution to that equation was always going to be prison, disgrace, and the loss of everything she tried to steal. I've used my experience to become an advocate for elder abuse prevention. I speak at medical conferences, work with law enforcement agencies, and help train pharmaceutical companies to recognize signs of exploitation. Clara's case has become a textbook example of how professional knowledge can be weaponized against vulnerable populations. My relationship with Devin has become one of the few positive outcomes from this tragedy. He's now 19, studying biochemistry in college, and he visits me regularly. We've built a relationship based on honesty about what his mother did and why. He's chosen to learn from Clara's mistakes rather than repeat them. "Grandma," he said during his last visit, "how do you trust people again after something like this?" It's a question I get often, and the answer isn't simple. You don't trust blindly anymore. You verify. You document. You pay attention to patterns rather than words. You understand that the most dangerous predators aren't strangers. They're the ones who know exactly which emotional buttons to push. But you also don't let one person's evil poison your capacity for human connection. Amelia is still my closest friend. Dr. Sarah Davidson has become a trusted confidant. Detective Morrison checks on me regularly. Alexander, my attorney, has become like family. Thomas and I maintain a cordial relationship, united in our shared victimhood of Clara's deception. The truth is, Clara taught me something valuable in the most horrific way possible. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's vulnerability waiting to be exploited. Real love requires healthy skepticism, protective instincts, and the wisdom to recognize when someone's actions don't match their words. Some teachers use textbooks and equations. My daughter taught me about human nature using arsenic and lies. But in the end, The lesson was learned, justice was served, and the student became stronger than the predator ever imagined possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.